because we have a great program this evening. For those of you who are visiting, we usually start off our evening with a Rotary moment stroke inspiration. And I prevailed upon Amanda Auckland to do it this evening. So it's over to you, Amanda. Sorry, and thank you very much.
I've had a lot of input from the one at the bottom of the screen there who has declined to do any of these little moments, but I'm going to do it. I'm brave. So just quick, it's just quick, right? Because I'm
Yes.
pretty new to hearing these. But I was dropping off my daughter the other day to a yoga studio where she's doing a work experience. And there's this little sign on the wall that said, "The words you speak become the house that you live in." And it just sort of, I don't know, it felt quite powerful and it kept resonating with me. And then I was trying to see how that would chime in to a moment tonight. And I think it has to be with the AEDs and Bowen, because that's how the Rotary really pulled that together. So, you know, teaching first aid for all these years and being a paramedic before that, I was always talking about you need to get access to an AED, you know, promptly, otherwise there's no point in CPR and whatnot. And so then the idea, I had an interview with Mary Beth Dean, and she talked about, you know, if there's something really neat that you could do island wide, what would it be? And, you know, I didn't, until that moment, didn't even really think of it. But then out popped, oh, wouldn't it be great to have AEDs anywhere? Then flash forward a few years, and someone sent me an email saying, let's do it. You know, there's a way of chiming together with the Rotary and getting this off the ground and doing training sessions with the neighborhoods that get them. And it worked. It all happened. So it just it feels really, it's just neat. So the words you speak can become the house or the island that you live in.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thanks, Amanda. That's really, really a great thought. And thank you very much for that. I have to tell you that I can't see very well this evening because I had cataract surgery yesterday. So my left eye is kind of blind. So whatever I do, I'm kind of peering at the moment. But whoops, I really am looking forward to introducing Adam Taylor this evening. And of course, most of you know Adam anyway, but did you know that his family has lived on Bowen since 1885? So they probably hold the medal for the answer to that question that everyone gets. How long have you lived on Bowen?
95. 1895.
Wow.
That is an amazing thing to hear. So both his parents were well-known citizens of Bowen. We knew them both, and we know his father. His mother, Gail, was Citizen of the Year in 1994 because she was our regional director for the GVRD at one stage. And Adam's father developed the Taylor Road and Valhalla areas of Bowen. And of course, that meant that Adam grew up pretty much above on Hummingbird Lane. As a kid, he boated with his dad and his grandfather, and then he learned to scuba dive almost 30 years ago. That would have made him, what, 8 years old when he learned to scuba dive, Adam?
I was 21.
That beard gives you away. He has always enjoyed sharing his passion for the ocean using underwater images. In fact, the first time I met Adam, he was showing his shots of underwater life to some fascinated kids on Miller's Beach after he'd just come up from a dive. But apart from that, he's done installations of divers' mooring buoys, underwater cleanups, and of course, the annual nature dive on Bowen. Recently, he's focused more on marine conservation causes, including the discovery, documentation, and protection of glass sponge reefs in Howe Sound. Looking forward to hearing exactly what glass sponge reefs are. Did you know that Adam is the president of the Underwater Council of BC? He's recently moved back to Bowen, temporarily, maybe, hopefully permanently, from his daytime job, which is project management of land development, park, and public space. He's moved back to care for his elderly father. which is great. I am hoping that our children will care for their elderly parents when we get to that stage of necessity. And we, of course, on Bowen, we've benefited from this move by seeing him on Facebook and YouTube with various tempting bits of video of his underwater exploits. But tonight, we are really happy to have almost an hour, we hope, to hear about his passion for house sound, its anemones, glass sponge reefs, and octopus. So it's over to you, Adam. Thank you very much. We are really looking forward to this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So as Hillary mentioned, I learned to dive close to 30 years ago, and I was always fascinated by the ocean. And I kind of had second thoughts because there was two main reasons I learned to dive, besides my love of the ocean. One, I grew up swimming off the beach in front of the family home. It's really, really deep between Bowen and Whitecliff there. And there was always the jokes that the older siblings and cousins would play, such as get the youngest child to go to the far rock and jump in the ocean. And then as you start swimming back, they'll yell shark and point behind you. I had this sort of uncomfortable feeling in deep, dark water. So I'm like, I know there's nothing there, but I want to see it for myself. So that was one of the reasons I learned to dive. The other was I was a very avid fisherman in my youth. My dad and my uncle were as well. And to hear the family stories going back to my grandmother's days about the abundance of fish and more specifically rockfish, and seeing the decline through my lifetime, I kind of wanted to learn to dive to see if the rockfish that we used to catch were really gone, or if they just moved on. And the sad truth is the rockfish were gone. I believe the Howe Sound has been closed to retention of rockfish and lingcod since early 90s. And the level compared to historic levels prior to European settlement are probably between 5 and 10% of the original biomass of rockfish in Howe Sound. It's really, really sad. But on the bright side, there has been signs of recovery, and you'll see some images of rockfish and other creatures and whatnot. And may as well just jump into the videos. I can pause between videos if you want to ask questions, or we can go right through to the end and then ask whatever question you want. So is there any preference right now for pause partway, or should we just get the videos over with so people can leave if they need to, then do question and answer?
Adam, are you saying that there are no rockfish now in Howe Sound?
There are, but it's at like 10% of the historic levels.
Wow.
So
Do they know what caused the decline? Do they know, son?
we did. They're tasty.
They rot.
They're
We
caught.
just
They were caught,
harvest them.
and people still poach them because there's not enough enforcement.
Wow.
And because they're very long-lived,
Yeah.
or there's many species of rockfish, but they're very long-lived. Many of them don't reach sexual maturity till 10, 15, almost 20 years.
Mhm.
And some of them live over 100 years. So the longer and the larger the fish, the more fecund the females are. So they have a disproportionately large number of young in their later years. So since the bigger ones have been caught and eaten, it's going to take a lot longer for the fish stocks to recover.
Wow.
I'll talk over the video and when we see rockfish and get into some of that. So we'll share my screen. I need, just trying to find.
Hi,
Here.
David.
Okay, can you see my screen here?
Yeah.
Yes.
There we go. Okay, we will start with a simple dive at King Edward Bay in the winter, because we dive year round, because the winter the visibility is usually better, and a lot of the smaller creatures and fish are they lay their eggs in the fall and the winter, so they hatch in time with the spring freshet and summer plankton blooms. There's my dive buddy Laura pointing out some grunt sculpin in these empty giant barnacles. They're a fabulous little fish that's evolved over hundreds of generations to resemble their favorite home, which is these barnacles that they're in. And these guys are all guarding eggs. Can't quite see them in behind. And speaking of eggs, this guy here is a buffalo sculpin. He's being very useful. Each color of eggs is a different female that's laid. So that's a male buffalo sculpin guarding his brood. Eelgrass, I believe that's still King Edward Bay, right in that little pocket bay there. And eelgrass is a very productive habitat. It not only sequesters carbon and whatnot, but it's a very useful hiding spot for juvenile salmon, juvenile crabs, and a number of species, including this little.
How deep is that?
Hooded nudibranch. Oh, that's 10, 15 feet.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can snorkel and see these. It's just that typically the water's a bit murky when it's warm enough to be comfortably swimming, but that's right under people's boats and docks, and that's one of the reasons there's concerns with places like Deep Bay where lots of anchorage and docks is that eelgrass will get damaged by the anchors or shaded and crowded out by docks.
Oh, look at those.
So you look, every bit of rock is covered with encrusting life, except you can see a few bare patches, and that's thanks to these green urchins. Now, their population has exploded since 2013 due to the sea star wasting disease. One of their main predators is the sunflower star, which was those large, 10, 15, 18-legged stars, typically orange or reddish ones. And they died off, and about 95% of them died off, so the urchins took over. Here is a wee little ruby octopus. It does not want to interact. Often octopus will reach out and interact with pirates. That was my buddy just trying and got the hint. And this is a juvenile giant Pacific octopus. It's about the size of the end of your thumb.
Wow.
It was in a bottle in the bottle field off of Mount Gardner Dock, and it was busy hunting along in the shell hash. So that would likely have settled after they hatch. They float up in the water column and they prey on small crustaceans. And eventually, when they get big like this guy, they prey on big ones.
Is this all in King Edward Bay?
Yeah, no, now we've moved. Sorry, this is Seymour. And that little octopus was Mount Gardner Dock. And this is off of Boyer Island, actually. This is an octopus mother guarding eggs. And that
wow.
Their life cycle is they live between 3 and 5 years. And the last thing that they do is mate. The males go senile, and the females guard the eggs until they die. They groom them and whatnot. Crimson anemone, which often has families of shrimp hiding underneath the tentacle for protection there. And often the visibility is fairly poor, so you spend time looking at little things. So if I get my close-up lens on, you can look at the mirror ball, the disco ball eyes on the shrimp, and it's absolutely fascinating, the small minute details. Nature.
Yeah.
You can
So
see the water
neat.
being hazy there. That's a shift in some fresh water mixing. Crimson star.
And
Then-
you might be interested in this. This is all diving in the,
So
Yeah.
there's interesting texture on all the stars. With this one, you play with the light a little bit and set up a close-up lens, and again,
Wow.
nature is absolutely amazing.
Beautiful.
Adam, what were you saying about starfish?
There was a sea star
Remember
waste
that?
disease that started in 2013.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of sea stars died off. Crimson stars and leather stars weren't nearly as impacted. Maybe 30% of the population died, but some of the larger stars were almost wiped out. It's very rare to see a sunflower star, which was a very voracious predator. They would eat anything they could catch.
And they ate the urchins.
And they ate the urchins. So with no sea stars to eat the urchins are eating everything on the bottom and creating barrens. So they'll eat kelp and whatnot. Here's
And
some
how did the sunflower starfish die off? Just
a wasting disease, probably due to overpopulation plus warm water temperatures.
yeah, I was wondering if it was climate.
So I'm going to pause and switch videos in a minute here, but these are copper rockfish. This is what I would typically catch fishing off the rocks in front of home and whatnot. Sorry, I just need to find my, right there. So sorry, it's a little fragmented. I didn't have time to put it all into one continuous, but
Oh, it's beautiful.
this is that octopus from Seymour Bay. This was summer, and he was probably about 4.5, 5 feet if he stretched his arms way out.
Oh.
And this was about 20 minutes into our encounter. We would, swim. He was hunting along the soft bottom.
Is he
Settle down
looks
off
like
to the
he's coming
side.
towards you?
Yeah, and then he would come check us out, and
Cool.
we would move on and settle down, not directly in his path to let him keep doing what he wants to do, but he kept coming and checking us out. And he was fascinated with my camera. Part of it might have been seeing his reflection. And he actually, if you watch, he crawls up onto the camera. So I basically put one hand on my regulator and my mask just to ensure that he doesn't dislodge it. Like, they're not necessarily dangerous or violent. They're very curious. And at this point, the lens may be pointing up at him, but I'm face to face, probably 6 inches, and just each other's eyes. And there's pulsing colors around his eye. It's a really
Oh my gosh.
cool and humbling experience to almost have this alien encounter. And yeah, he's checking out my camera. He's actually manipulating the light arm. And I found out after the fact that he'd stolen one of the floats that was on the arm to help offset the weight of the camera. So literally, so 5 minutes, there he is moving the arm of that had my light on it, and so I just sped it up so you don't have to watch the whole thing. But it was mesmerizing, and there's my buddy checking on me to make sure I'm good. It's octopus encounters like that don't happen all the time, but if you're observant and you're patient and you're not up in the water column and looking like a seal or a predator, they'll often come right to you. And in some instances, if I settle down on the bottom and call my buddies over, the octopus will hide under me when they show up because they figured out that I'm not a threat. And there's that bump there was the part of he was taking home to his den to see if he could eat it.
Where's his eye? Where
His
are
eye is up top, right there.
Where?
Horizontal
Oh my goodness.
pupil.
Side views. Yeah.
Yeah. And
He has two, right?
sorry?
He has two eyes, right?
Yeah. So this is the side of his head, and he's
Okay.
looking right at me.
Adam, how long do they live?
Between 3 and 5 years. So
That one is out there tonight.
Yes, and that one's fairly mature. They'll grow rapidly. So the first few months after hatching, they're up in the water column, and then from once they get down to the bottom, within say 6 months of hatching, they will grow extremely large based on the available food. And again, the colder the water is, I'm just going to stop this here. The colder the water is, the more oxygen it can carry. So places off of Vancouver Island, they've captured octopus that are 22 feet from armpit to armpit.
Mm.
All right.
Wow.
Largest I've seen is probably 12, maybe a bit bigger. And those ones I keep a healthy distance from. I'm not, better safe than sorry. I've never ever had a bad interaction with octopus. They've always been curious and reach out and touchy, but they've never been grabby or anything like that. And it's good to be, aware of where you are, where the octopus is. They will give signs if they're stressed and whatnot. And if you let them come to you, you know, a lot of people say don't interact with wild animals, but they're just so alien and wonderful that if we settle down and they come to us, great. But if they show stress, then we move on. So there's octopus. Now on to my, other than octopus, my favorite is glass sponge reefs. So I'll give a bit of a background before I get into the science. Glass sponges are one of the oldest organisms on Earth. They've been around for, I think, 600 million, 700 million years. Glass sponge reefs are essentially reef structures built up on the dead remains of previous generations. And they were a very important part of the ancient seas back, you know, pre-dinosaur time. They actually coexisted with the dinosaurs, and they were thought to have gone extinct 40 million years ago. There's a fossilized remains of a very large reef in southern Europe, stretching from Portugal to Romania through the mountain chain there. And that reef contained 30 odd species of glass sponge. Now off the coast of BC in the 1980s, there were discoveries by the Geologic Survey of Canada in, I think, 3,000 or 4,000 feet of water of living glass sponge reefs consisting of 3 species of sponge. And to date, those are the only known reef building sponges left in the world. So my dive buddy Glenn had been diving on a few of these reefs, just thinking they were really prolific sponges. And it wasn't until some researchers with the Vancouver Aquarium discovered a reef off of Defense Islands up near Porto Cove and he was talking to them, that they put 2 and 2 together, that wait a minute, there are shallow sponge reefs in Howe Sound, as well as some deeper ones. Other than some very secret, I shouldn't say secret, a few people know of another shallow reef up in the Discovery Islands area, which is shallow enough to scuba dive on. But other than that, Howe Sound's the only location in the world where you can actually get down, scientists can get down and see these reef structures and these animals in person on scuba equipment. And so when I differentiate between the shallow reefs in Howe Sound and the deep ones, shallow I refer to being within scuba limits, which is 130 feet. Most of them, there's 5 within 130 feet, but most of the rest of them are in the 250 to 350 foot depth.
Wow.
I kind of use like they're all on sea mounts and ridges. They're filter feeder, so they pull the water through their body, but they do rely on the tidal currents and the upwellings from the contours of the bottom to bring larger volumes of water to them, so then they can feed more. And a sponge will process 9 times its body volume per hour. They're voracious filter feeders. And I'll start the video game now. So by glass sponge, they're basically made up of a skeleton of silica spicules, these little 6-sided rays here. And these are electron microscope images. So imagine it being, you know, the thickness of a hair, basically. So this is a single one, and they have different shapes and different ends, and they form these matrices, think of like a scaffolding, and then the skin and the tissue goes around the outside. And this is a macro shot from one of the sponges at Halkett Point, and you can sort of see the little spicules sticking out. Sponge gardens are well known and documented throughout the Pacific Ocean and elsewhere, which is essentially sponges growing on a rocky substrate. They haven't created their own reef. They're not built up off the bottom. And this fabulous little one is off the west side of Bowen. And we've named it the Enchanted Forest because it's so miniature. They're growing on little cobbles. And if they grow too big, the current pushes them over. Then we get into larger glass sponge gardens. This is the same species you just saw, but they're growing much larger because they're not getting blown over. This is the rocky pinnacle off of Halkett Point on Gambier Island. And this was the site that we had the province of BC expand Halkett Provincial Park to cover this to help protect these sponges. And in a later video, you'll see we've received funding and installed some anchor bolts. So once we finish the management plan with the Parks Department, divers can access this and scientists can access, but we don't want to put the surface float on and attract fishermen until we get more enforcement from DFO, and also confirmation on the management plan, which would include minimum experience level and specific training to dive these very delicate sites, because not only are they easily damaged by impacts like someone's depth gauge dangling, but they also can get silted out just from bad fin kicks and whatnot. Here's how Glenn would find them with a depth sounder and then drop camera. But most places on the coast of BC, you need drop cameras, ROVs, or submarine to view them. Very expensive and time-consuming process. This is off of Lions Bay. This is about 260 feet, 270 feet down. So about the deepest I've ever been.
Beautiful.
It's fascinating to be sitting in a submarine talking. And usually when you're diving, you gotta, write on a slate or bang your tank to get someone's attention. But this was, an hour of pure bliss, just talking and looking and making notes and shooting video. And yeah, it was there was the sub pilot, myself, and Jessica who used to be with the Vancouver Aquarium. And even her, after years of research, was just stunned and fascinated. So this is what it looks like diving on these. These are all cloud sponges, different colors. We don't know exactly why there's slight color variations. Closer to the Fraser, there's a microbe that turns some of them more orange. We think it's sort of like a not a parasite, but sort of a mutual beneficial arrangement. And as you can see, these reefs are covered in fish life, and all the little nooks and crannies are full of small crustaceans, squat lobster and shrimp and stuff. And the brown pieces are dead, either from damage or siltation, and the white and cream ones alive. So we're going to do a little tour of the shallower sponge reefs in Howe Sound. North, working our way south, East Defense Islands. There's the Defense Islands right there. It's often murky. There's often not a lot of light. This day happened to have a fair bit of sunlight because there was some glacial runoff in the shallow part of the water that really diffused the sunlight. And in more recent years, say from 2016, 17 onwards, these yellowtail rockfish have settled in Howe Sound and all over the water column above these reefs. They're more of a plankton and or small fish eating rockfish. They live up in the midwater column. Unlike the one on the bottom there, the brown and yellow is a quillback rockfish, and they tend to stay close to the bottom, and they basically have a hidey hole they like. So, for example, a little spot on that sponge there, and they will basically live there for decades, unless they grow to a size where they can eat larger prey. They may go a bit deeper, but that fish there could be years old, and it could be they lived to 95, so it could live in that same patch of reef within 10 feet of that one spot, longer than I'm going to be alive. So
what is the name of that rockfish?
That's a quillback rockfish. That's one of the more common deep water rockfish, or deep for divers. They tend to start showing up at about 70, 80 foot depth, whereas the coppers tend to be from 20 feet.
What's that?
These are sea whips. I left this one in because they grow right. This case they're growing right next to the sponge reefs, and they're also a filter feeder. They're octocoral. So each one of those little bumps you see is got a little 8-armed feeding head. Lost Reef is a seamount in between Christie Islet and Pam Rocks. So basically, we drop a marker line about 50 feet outside of the live reef and follow it down and hope we get to the right spot, because often the visibility is terrible. Currents going one direction on the surface, another way, another direction underwater, and the line is on a big angle through the current, and we can't pull on it because we don't want to drag the weight and have it, smash into the sponge. So when we dive these sites, we don't always get to the same spot twice. Sometimes if we're doing some citizen science, like collecting a temperature logger or something, sometimes it might take more than one dive to find it again, because they're beautiful, but they're so variable in their shape, and they change as they grow. It's hard to recognize a specific spot unless you get used to the contours, and once you get a good dive with really good visibility, you can start to get a feel for the reef. But something like Lost Reef is acres in size, so you just try to deploy at the same spot each time, so we can at least get some repeat footage and get some consistency on what we're seeing.
What depth would this be?
This is about 130 feet. This is right at the maybe 120. This is the very edge of recreational scuba limit. And due to the pressure and the amount of nitrogen that your body brings in because of the compressed nature of the air at that depth, you're limited to, say, 10 to 15 minutes bottom time. And then you have to go to the surface, and in some instances a little longer. You have to do a bit of a safety stop to let any excess nitrogen out of your system. And pardon me, that there are some teams that we're working with that use mixed gases, and they'll go to extreme depths. They'll go to 250, 300 feet. You see these rockfish just schooling up. Blinking in the back.
Adam.
Yep.
When you dive these, couldn't you use a GPS coordinate for that?
Well, we use a GPS on the surface, but underwater we can't. We would have to actually get, and it's on our wish list, is some passive sonar pingers that we could put some receivers in, and then have an underwater navigation system, because then we could actually follow transects and get repeat video of the same area. So this is Halka. We're actually tied up to a temporary, the mooring system on the bottom, you can just barely make out there, is permanent, but right now it only goes to a midpoint float. The anchor bolts are in about 80 feet of water, and that float is at 65 feet. And this was a rare day where you could actually see the boat on the surface. That does not happen very often. We're talking a day in 100 sponge reef dives. I've seen the surface twice.
Wow.
And this is the sponge garden, being the sponge on rock on top of the pinnacle. And as you head north off of this rocky pinnacle, which is 80-ish feet at the top, it drops to 600 feet on the side, 400 feet on the right, and closer to 800 feet to the south. So when you're diving these sites, you want to make sure you trick your boat into putting you in the right spot, because if not, you're just seeing nothing and having to go back up to the surface. So here's the beginning of the sponge reef. All the brown area is dead sponge, and that is likely due to traps. They get caught on the rocky ridge, and then the line sort of slices the sponge down. It mows it down. It's really sad. And where the traps don't get pulled by current too, it's big, tall sponge like this, up to almost 2 meters high. Alejandro Freed from Bowen, if you know him, is yellow eye rockfish, which that species lives to, I believe, 115 years old. So one probably 4 or 5 years old, but it will hang around until it gets larger, and then it'll go depths. The sponges themselves, they grow between 1 or 2 and 10 centimeters per year, depending upon water quality available food, available silica for the
Look at
building.
all the fish.
Yeah, and this we'll get into another video I'll show. Those are shiner perch. They're the same thing you see off the dock, the same thing that kids catch off the dock. They're typically a shallow water fish and they're a plankton eater. So finding that depth on these reefs was a bit of a surprise for us, and you know, some of the fish will be down there. So they must be after something. So there will be some natural upwelling and extra food, like the sponges are eating small bacteria, and they're sequestering carbon. Believe it or not, they sequester carbon. A full healthy reef like this, a square meter of reef will sequester as much carbon as a square meter of old growth forest or kelp forest. So imagine, you know,
Wow.
2 tall trees and how much carbon they're sequestering. These little sponges are such a voracious feeder that they're sequestering that much carbon. And in the process, they are, here's some more of those yellowtails. In the process of eating all those bacteria and microbes, their waste product is an ammonia-like substance, which appears to act as a fertilizer for the plankton, which is, we're still waiting to do some research on it. It seems that all these plankton-eating fish above these reefs are actually benefiting from plankton growth and or blooms from the waste, the ammonia type product being produced by these sponges. So
Wow.
a lot of people get excited about the fact that they're ancient and that they're, you know, got a lot of crustaceans and other life. I look at it as they're little factories underwater. They're cleaning the water, but they're also seeding the plankton as far or providing food for the plankton.
What a great balance.
Their full role in the ecosystem isn't understood. Like they've been studied to a great extent, but that's what's so fascinating is we've got, you know, dedicated teams of divers and grad students and all volunteer out on the weekends, diving these sites, documenting, pushing for protection, sharing the images and even doing some joint collaborative projects with different scientists. It's basically it's a living laboratory and it's right in our backyard. It is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
So this is Dorman, and this is about 235 meters right off the point. There's a pinnacle that goes from 800 feet deep up to 115. And one of my favorites, there's downtown Vancouver, and I'm going to jump in, and at 85-foot depth, we're going to be right on another sponge reef. This one's fairly fragmented. I think a lot of prawn trap damage and even possibly some towboat damage from log booms and barges and stuff. It's so shallow. If they let the lines drag, it'll just completely demolish these sponges.
Oh, too bad.
But in a minute here, there will be a few species of fish, and I'm going to pause it and give people some food for thought as to how important and why we should stop and think about these reefs. So these sponges growing at 2 to 10 centimeters per year, they're decades or hundreds of years old. What we don't know clearly is as they silt over, they keep growing up. So the sponges themselves could be hundreds and hundreds of years old. You're just seeing the live portion of it. It could just keep growing above the sediment as it starts sedimenting in. And it's important to note is when the sponges break down, like the tissue on the outside may dissolve, but the silica spicules, like that lattice work, like the scaffolding, remains intact. So that mud, that silica-rich mud, could be many meters deep and could be hundreds, if not thousands, likely thousands of years old. Geologic Survey has not done many core samples in Howe Sound, but based on glaciation and water levels, they theorize that these reefs started forming 6,000 years ago. So this is essentially an old growth forest on the bottom of the ocean, pumping water, sequestering carbon, adjusting the water chemistry, and I believe add a significant benefit to the ocean. So think These sponges are as old as we are. This blue rockfish is called the deacon. They're the shortest lived species in frame. They only live to about 45 or 50. The quillbacks live to 95. The yellow eyes live to 115. And the ones you barely see in the background are yellowtails, and they'll live to 75 years. So everything in this frame right here has human lifetimes, if we don't destroy it, if we don't catch and eat the fish. So it's kind of humbling to be down in this alien environment that coexisted with the dinosaurs. Like the first dive I ever did on a sponge reef was off Dormant Point, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up as I'm floating in the current over top of the sponges, thinking that instead of a seal or a whale swimming by, way back, there could have been a dinosaur swimming by, the same type of habitat. So it's kind of an opportunity to time travel to part of the ocean that is similar to what it would have been, hundreds of millions of years ago. Okay, carrying on. Here's our pretty fish. And you can see they've all got their own little spot they like to be, but it's fairly densely populated down there. And the sad thing is, as much as I'd love to share this publicly, it's hard to show the Vancouver skyline and then jump in and see all these fish that are tasty and easily caught. There's so little enforcement that by sharing this, we run the risk of creating a roadmap for poaching, because there are a lot of people out fishing illegally. I probably report, not so much this time of year, but through the summer, I would be reporting people daily from looking off my dad's deck, and I'll see someone fishing where they're not supposed to, or catching and retaining a rockfish, and I'll be phoning in or sending in photos and emails to the enforcement people.
And do they enforce it? Do they respond?
I've yet to see them respond for fishing. I have seen them respond for prawn traps in the closure areas. Back in 2015, there was a stakeholder consultation between DFO, fishermen, First Nations, and the conservation groups to enact closures on the sponge reefs that DFO had found themselves. And that was 9 reefs, 2 in Howe Sound and 7 in the Strait of Georgia. And at that point, my buddy Glenn had discovered, I think, 7 more reefs in Howe Sound, but he was discouraged from talking about it by one of the large national conservation organizations that I will not name, because they thought it would, 1, possibly derail the talks, and 2, they wouldn't get any credit for it because it wasn't their discovery. But needless to say, we fought long and hard to get DFO back to the table. And because of it took about 4 years. In the meantime, we weren't, taking no for an answer. We met with all the local and regional governments, with Squamish Nation, and we pushed for the province to expand Halkett Provincial Park to at least have another level of government involved in discussions. The good news is last summer they announced closures on the reefs that Glenn had discovered and MLSS had documented in detail. And next, I think 2 weeks from now, we've got the 3rd round of discussions on some more sponge reefs that 2 of them were provided by Glenn and MLSS, but they weren't field proofed enough to be included in that 2nd round of closures. And a couple of them were Geologic Survey of Canada finds. So there's more that have been found and will likely be protected in the near future. So I thought here I would share put sound on here. One of our typical dive days. This is the last video, so don't. This would be this February, very beginning of February, so just before COVID was a thing. And we get a beautiful winter morning, and we're out on, this is Glenn's boat, it's a private boat, private money.
Hi, I'm Megan, and I'm here with the Marine Life Sanctuary Society over top of the Howe Sound Halkett Glass Sponge Reef. And we're here to do a proof of concept dive using some fluorescing dye and showing how the sponges actually filter all the water here in Howe Sound. All right, so we're gonna mix up the calcine, which is an organic dye a fluorescing dye that's safe to use with sponge life or marine life. So we're going to use
And Megan's a grad student.
just about
She was at
half a
UBC and she's
teaspoon.
transferred over to Simon.
And some seawater. And stir, stir, stir.
Highly scientific.
Get the clumps out. Yeah. All right, so the dye's all mixed. So we're gonna suck it up into the
We're just like a bunch of
syringe
kids out
here.
on the boat and we'll get distracted easily.
Oh, there's dolphins outside. Maybe.
We're in the middle of,
Stuck. Science.
we're sciencing inside.
Okay. No clumps. That's good. So these will be nice and easy to use when we're underwater.
They were gone by the time we got.
Now we got to go check
Anyway,
on
so
the
we tried a couple
dolphins.
different sponges. We didn't go into the sponge reef just because of the sedimentation issues. We did it at about 80 feet, so we had more time to experiment. And we injected the dye into the water column around the sponge to get footage of what it looks like the visualization of them feeding. And when you watch this, you imagine acres upon acres of sponges, various reefs. They're pulling in seawater, they're extracting bacteria and microbes, sequestering carbon. And if you imagine the little green you see coming up, like smoke, imagine that's their waste product, and that would in turn be helping feed plankton and whatnot. So the 9 reefs that were protected last year totaled 140 acres. They pump based on DFO's estimates of video transects and how many live sponges there were, how many osculans, the openings in the top, and so on.
Holy smokes.
They figured 17 billion liters of water is pumped per day by those 9 reefs, and that's just some of them. So to put that in perspective, if you take 1.6 million people living in Greater Vancouver and imagine everything that goes down your drains, your toilets, etc. Just again, I'm comparing wastewater volume to ocean volume. Like sponges don't process sewage; it's just a volume comparison. If you took everything that Metro Vancouver puts down the drains in a total day, take a guess on how long it would take those 140 acres of sponge reefs to filter that water. Anyone want to make a guess? For a day's worth of equivalent volume of a day's worth of sewage. Any guesses? 2 hours, 20 minutes.
What?
They are little factories on the bottom, cleaning the water. Again, seawater that they're doing. I only use sewage as something you might be able to wrap your head around, because 17 billion liters, it's 6,500 Olympic-sized swimming pools. I work in land development and I deal with large volumes of soil and area. I can't quite visualize 6,500 swimming pools. So sewage one was a way to compare. And an even more shocking stat, when you combine the Howe Sound sponge reefs and the Strait of Georgia reefs, they will pump the entire volume of water in Howe Sound and Strait of Georgia in 83 days. So they will turn over the equivalent of the entire body of water 4 times a day. So this is Dorman Point. This is my buddy Hamish's footage from a few weeks back. I didn't attend because of COVID, but we had a team go down, check the damage, because the barge that sank off Dorman Point was disposed of by a contractor, and they pushed it into the bay. Thankfully, they put it away from the reef. But so here we come back to all these little shiner fish. It's a little bit thicker than normal because of the dive lights that the second diver is holding up above. But this is a plankton eating small fish. And what is it doing in summer at 130 feet? It's feeding on something. it's feeding on the plankton that I theorize is actually being fed by the waste from these sponges. So I'd leave it with this thought: the least healthy reef in Howe Sound has about 40% live sponge cover. The healthiest reef in the Strait of Georgia, where they're significantly larger but have been damaged by bottom trawling and other fishing activities, is 35%. If all these reefs together will process the volume of water in 82 days, imagine if those 35% live sponge reefs were at 50% or 60% live sponge. What type of
Amazing.
on the water column? Would it be providing more food for the bait fish and the herring and so on? Would that help with the recovery of the marine ecosystem? I would say yes, but there's so little known. There needs to be a lot of different studies to determine, and that's the fun thing about diving and doing this volunteer work is we can do some of the legwork for the scientists at a low cost and collect data locally in shallow water and prove out concepts that I'm going to stop this here. Prove out concepts that they could, if it works, they can then take it and they can go, off the coast of central BC and they can do the same type of experiments at 3,000 feet or whatnot. But they're not wasting the money of a $20,000 per day ocean-going research vessel and crew. So that's my.
Amazing.
Wow.
Very inspiring.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Wow.
So questions, and if at the end, if maybe I'll put it in the chat, tomorrow on CBC Gem and Saturday night on CBC, I believe it's 8 o'clock, there's a new documentary airing called Moonlit Oasis, and that is about the same stuff we just talked about, the Howe Sound sponge reefs, the volunteer efforts to
Oh, cool.
and study. I have not seen it yet. I believe it focuses on our deep dive team, the technical guys who go to 250, 300 feet as a way to tie the story together. So I'm cautiously optimistic that it will properly tell the story of the hundreds of volunteers, and most of this work is all being out of pocket. Like, we pay for our own gear, we pay for the boat. Occasionally we'll get funding for a specific project, but most of this is just people spending their Saturdays or Sundays out on the water, exploring and trying to, raise awareness and trying to push for protection. So it's been a very rewarding, personally rewarding and enjoyable process.
Fantastic, Adam.
Thank you for doing that.
That's amazing.
Thanks for
So
sharing.
questions on anything?
I have a question. All the plastic that is going into our oceans right now, what happens is the glass sponge able to do something?
We don't know, and it's at the top, if not the top, it's very close to the top of our list. Once COVID is sorted out, we're in the process of putting together a bigger funding, but we're going to put together a bigger citizen science proposal for what are the studies we can do, what would it take to charter boats versus lease a boat or buy a boat, and who can we collaborate with. We've already got some projects planned with DFO Science. We have some space at Pacific Science Enterprise Center, which is the DFO lab in West Vancouver. And there is a researcher from the Vancouver Aquarium that studies ocean plastics. So we've already had conversations about if we get them core samples, they can check for plastics. And, as far as core samples of sediment, imagine, a couple meters of the silica-rich mud. So there will be a layer where plastics get introduced. There will be a layer where metals get introduced from the Britannia mine. So there will be, ways to age date some of the sediment cores based on, the human impacts. I don't know how much the sponges actually eat plastic, like maybe microfibers they might ingest, but they're such a selective feeder. I think if anything, it would just be stuff that had fallen in between the sponges for plastics, but we don't know and we want to find out.
What might be the impact of those huge LNG bulk carriers down from, God forbid, wood fiber on an impact on the sponge glass reefs down?
That the biggest concern is prop wash, especially for these shallower reefs, and we've recommended that they ensure that the path that they take avoids the shallower reefs, because these massive tankers have 25, 30-foot diameter props, and the thrust cone under full pressure or full throttle is something like 2 kilometers long. So theoretically, if one of these big tankers went right over top of one of these reefs and it was, running at full steam, or, more than just barely turning the prop, it would blow these sponges right off the bottom and or silt them out. So not only they sensitive to impact damage, they also are very selective in what they eat. And if the water's too turbid, or if it's being disturbed by bottom contact, like prawn traps or dragging the nets through the bottom, if there's too much sediment, they stop feeding. And if they stop feeding too often, they're going to choke out and die. So it is a very real threat. And we haven't made as big of a deal out of it up till now. Oh, hold on a sec. I'm being paged. Give me a sec. I'm just going to put you on pause.
That is so interesting, isn't it?
What do you guys know about, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Very well.
About that, My Sea to Sky protecting house sound? They're pretty active. Are they doing really good work? Do you guys anyone know about them?
My Sea to Sky, Tracy Hacks.
Yeah, Tracy Saxby or something like that.
Saxby. I've had a lot of correspondence with her. I've shared a number of my images for their conservation. So they're pretty much focused on LNG. They do good work, but they're very anti, for lack of a better word. Their stance is anti-LNG versus we try to thread walk a line of pro sponge, not anti anything else.
Okay, yeah, so I always want to get everyone else's feedback.
Yeah, so they're good, don't get me wrong, but we try to just focus on the sponges are incredible, they're unique, they need to be protected for the sake of protected, not protected because, we try to separate the issues.
Okay, thanks.
Are unique and beautiful and, special enough that irregardless of what the source of potential damage or impact may be, they need to be protected.
What can we do to help that?
I can put a link in the chat. Check out Marine Life Sanctuary Societies of BC, mlsbc.com, I believe. It's a registered charity if you guys want to help. If you want to write letters to the MLA, a member of Parliament, fisheries, and just encourage them to consider additional protection. At least we've been loud and vocal enough, and we've got enough, support from all the local and regional governments, as well as First Nations, that government's listening now, saying, well, we can do something. How fast? I don't know, but we do have another stakeholder consultation starting in 2 weeks about 4 more reef areas and 2 glass sponge gardens. And I think they're going to throw rockfish conservation areas into the discussion, which would help, if not give absolute full protection to all uses, it would at least give a more holistic approach to how can we support and protect these sponge reefs and the life that surrounds them.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
When you say we, who are you talking about, Adam?
Most of the work is done through Marine Life Sanctuary Society. The dive teams and the management plan at Halkett Park is the Underwater Council of BC, which is recreational divers. So basically, it's a loose group of organizations and their volunteers that are all working towards a similar goal. There are some larger organizations involved in the background with the stakeholder discussions. The Vancouver Aquarium does some direct research. David Suzuki Foundation is being supportive, as has CPAWS, but they're more of a paid staff policy type people. Like, they sit in meetings. They're not actually out physically doing the discoveries and the research and the lobbying at the local level, because they kind of feel, they think it's a federal issue and they should only talk to the feds. And I think it's a local, it's a community issue. It's our backyard, and if anyone's going to care about it, it's going to be us. So we have a different approach, and our approach so far has been working, and we're very pleased to be able to carry on and share stories with people like you and with governments and get some traction. So after the next meeting, if it sounds like they're not moving, I'll be happy to send out an email to the Rotary to say, hey, if people are interested in supporting, here are some steps you can take.
Oh, that'd be
great.
Mhm.
I have a question. First of all, thank you so much for that presentation. Yuri and I were oohing and awing, and I had to check the mute button a couple times to make sure we were jumping in. I was wondering, you mentioned that the sponges regulate the pH in the water around them, and I was wondering if the pH of the water ever impacts the ability of the sponge to grow.
Yes, the biggest consideration is water temperature. I neglected to mention that. They thrive below 10 degrees centigrade. So, if it's 7, 8, 9, they're happy. Once it gets to 9.5, 10 degrees, 11 degrees, they actually stop feeding. So that is a consideration, but also pH change with as climate change and whatnot. That is also a challenge for their feeding, and this is being found from small. Do you remember the earlier footage of that sponge garden with the tiny little sponges? A researcher from UBC collected some of those because they're easy to collect because they're on little blocks, and she had them in the lab for 6 or 8 months. And she went through various climate change scenarios with warmer water, pH change, both, and they definitely are impacted, and they will be threatened by climate change, especially the really shallow ones. We've had temperature loggers on 6 of the sites, and was a spike in, I think it was 2015 in the summer, of warm water moving from the south end of the sound all the way to the north end. It took about 2 weeks between the spike hitting Passage Island Reef to the one at Island. So it's definitely a real threat of climate change to these reefs, and we want to start exploring that. And we were going to apply for some funding, but the typical, there's a lot of extra money, but you need to put all the pieces of paper together by the end of the month, was just not working for a purely volunteer organization.
Right.
That's why we're just going to make a wish list of projects, costs associated with it, and then we're going to be, going to our MP. We're going to be going to, trying to meet with the fisheries minister and say, get us some funding. So,
Adam, we hear a lot about the coral reefs around Australia, and they're dying off. Is there the potential for that to happen here?
For sure. Like some of the reefs that have, died around here, we don't know 100% if it was purely temperature or if it was pollution. There is a dead reef for Ellesmere Creek, which is quite close to wood fiber. And that was likely the pulp mill that killed it off in the 80s. But again, it's just such a long way to go, and we're so excited making discoveries and trying to protect them. We haven't done much research or dives at the dead reef because it's dead. But it is important to, as we start looking at the bigger picture, if we start collecting specific scientific data, water temperature, available oxygen, turbidity, etc., that if there's one reef that's dead, we should collect data there too to see if there's negative factors at that reef that don't exist at others, to help determine can they be reseeded. And that was one of the joint projects we did with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, as we put a few different types of glass or ceramic tiles on a little plastic tree next to the sponges in the hope to collect larvae and to see if there's a way that they could basically, just like reforestation, could you collect larvae and then move them to a damaged portion of reef? And it was unsuccessful, and in my mind, it was the wrong materials and at the wrong height, but I'm not a scientist, so they don't always listen to me, but next time they will.
Never give up.
Um,
Cool.
just, I guess first Steph and I were both also very oohing and awing over all your images. That was really amazing. With there was so many fish over the glass sponge reefs, and have there been studies done to see, sort of the differences in terms of population in areas with and without of,
Basically, without the sponge reef, it's pretty much barren, muddy bottom. There's not much. There's been studies comparing glass sponge garden to glass sponge reef. Sponge gardens have a much higher number of different species, but they're not as dense. So I forget I'd have to pull the study up, but let's say, for example, there's 150 different species found in a sponge garden because there's the red rock, there's encrusting growth, there's things eating that. Sponge reefs are not that diverse. They're so dense, sponge forces out almost all other life. So unless it's a sponge, it lives in or around a sponge for shelter, or it eats a sponge like some sea slugs and other things and sea stars, that's all you find there. But you find it in great abundance, like those schools and schools of rockfish. So yeah, it's quite fascinating. They're basically like an oasis of life in the deep water.
Mm-hmm.
Adam, do the sea stars that had that wasting disease, are they coming back a bit now?
They are, but not as fast as we would like. And there seems to be some outbreaks of the wasting disease from time to time. So it's been an extreme shift throughout the water column, because it's a full trickle down effect. Without the sea stars, the urchins take over. The urchins eat the kelp. Juvenile shrimp and prawns and rockfish that would hide in the kelp are getting eaten and picked off, so those levels aren't recovering as fast. So, don't be surprised to have prawn catches declining over the next few years, because there's not as many juveniles, juvenile prawns living through the part of their life cycle where they hide in the eelgrass and the kelp and stuff like that. So it's a huge cascade.
I believe that that starfish, the wasting disease, has been pretty broad around the world, hasn't it?
Oh, it's throughout the Northeast Pacific. I'm not sure if it's made it around the world yet, but it was the largest event, mass die-off event, in recorded scientific history.
And do they know what caused it?
It was there was a wasting disease that would often go away in colder water periods, and there was a period of warmer water, the blob off of the coast, and population overcrowding. Sunflower stars, quite frankly, I don't even have many good images of them, because they were so thick. They were like 2 and 3 on top of each other, and anywhere from, say, 30-foot depth to about the 15-foot depth, I would just swim past because it was nothing but sea stars. And then after they died off, it was like, wow, look at all these different things taking over that real estate that had been previously completely covered by these stars. So
this is being recorded, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
If I wanted to share it with family that's not here, there's a way to do that? Or
I sometimes publish these as part of our website on YouTube, but I heard Adam saying he's concerned about.
I don't think it's going to get too far. What I'm concerned about is having something be super well liked if it was specific to sponge reefs and rockfish, because then, a fisherman can look at it and go, oh, well, now I know where to go catch my fish. So, but I've got to run and help my dad. I'm happy to come back in 5 minutes if you guys want to have a little quick chat, but I need to go get my dad something.
Well, Adam, maybe we should just say thank you very, very much. We would love to have you back again sometime.
I'm always happy to talk. Thank you. Thank you.
Very
for your
Thank you,
time.
thank you. Wonderful, thank you.
Bless you.
Excellent.
Thank you.